I use markers and coloured pencils on all of my realistic drawings, whether it's a person, an animal, a Lego minifigure, a car, and in this video I'm going to break apart exactly how I do this, and make sure you stick around for the entire video, because if you miss out a step, then your drawings may end up a bit weird. So in order to use the markers and coloured pencils together, we need to have a sketch to actually colour in, and in order to do all of my sketches, no matter what the subject is, I use something called the grid method, which I have a separate video dedicated entirely to. But once we have this sketch, the first thing that we need to do is come in with something called a kneadable eraser. Now, if you're wondering what the heck a kneadable eraser is, it's basically an eraser, as the name suggests, that has the consistency of like soft blue tack. And what a lot of people do is they like to kind of like shape it and knead it into like fine points and then go in and like erase stuff in their drawings. But the way that I like to use it is I go in and knead it just to warm it up a bit, and then I go into the sketch in a dabbing motion, just like so. And you can see here it's lightening up those lines, but leaving a really nice faint outline of the sketch that was there before. And what this is doing is it's removing the excess graphite. You can see here it's building that up on the surface there, and it's stopping that graphite from mixing with the markers and coloured pencils that we're going to be putting on top a bit later. And I do want to point out that it's really important that you're occasionally kneading the eraser to clean the surface, so you're not taking the graphite from, let's say, up here and smearing it around the entire piece. And now that we've done that, we can actually get on to using the markers. So the markers that I would recommend and that I use on all of my realistic drawings are called Ohuhu Honolulu markers, which is a very cool name. And yeah, I've got 216 colors here, but you do not need 216 colors. Trust me, I will probably never use all of these colors. I would recommend getting a pack of 48. So I actually bought this one first to try them out, and I drew a green Lamborghini with this, and I liked them so much that I did get this bigger set because I thought they were just as good, if not better, than more expensive brands like the Winsor & Newton Pro Marker brush and the Copic sketches. And if you're wondering what these Ohuhus look like, they're basically like this. They've got their broad tip, just like other markers, but they also have a brush tip, which is usually only found on those really expensive markers. So this is basically a bigger bullet nib, which has a bit of flexibility to it, so you can see just there. And if you'd like to check out these Ohuhu markers, I have them linked down in the description. So the next problem we're faced with is which of these colors are we actually going to be using, because we're not going to be using all 48 or 216 on our drawing. So here's exactly how I pick the exact markers that I'm going to be using for my drawing. So in order to pick the colors, I basically just look at the reference photo and go, okay, so he's got some gray in the hair, he's got that peachy color for his head and hands, you've also got that blue in the body, you've got some red and also some yellow. So I'm going to be picking out the blues here as an example, and you can see here amongst the set I have a load of different blues. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick out a few really light blues, a few intermediary blues, which are colors that aren't quite as light as the lightest colors, but then aren't quite as dark as the darkest colors, and you can use them to blend between those two extreme tonal values. Then I'm going to pick out a couple of the darkest colors too. So here are some of my light blues, my intermediary blues, and then my darkest blues, which are basically purple. And I then repeat this process for all the color families that are present in the photograph. So these right here are all the markers that I think could work on this drawing, and the reason I say, quote, could work, is the fact that I highly doubt I'll be using every single one of these, and I'll explain why now. So one thing I like to do before going into the sketch is just doing a little swatch test of the color that the marker is actually giving me, because sometimes the color on the cap isn't necessarily the exact color that you're going to get. You can see here that the color we got is slightly darker, and then what I do is I look at the reference photo and go, okay, so can I actually see this color present in the photograph? And I think in this case, for the Napoleon blue here, yeah, this color is definitely present in the shadows. And by doing this, you do scout out a lot of the colors that you picked out that aren't actually present in the photograph. And I do want to point out that a lot of the times, the colors that you get from different markers are actually very similar. So you can see here, these two lines are actually done with two separate markers. So in this case, there's not really any point having both of them out. So I actually put one of these away, and then I only use one of them. So we now know how to pick the markers for our drawings. But before I get on to showing you actually how to use the markers, I just want to explain exactly why we're using markers in the first place. And the reason is actually very simple. Is because when you put colored pencils on top of an already colored surface, they look a heck of a lot more vibrant than they would if you put them onto like a white surface. Because if you've ever used colored pencils before, you'll know that if you put them directly onto white paper, you get those white little speckles showing through. However, here, because you've gone in initially with the markers, you basically flooded the page with color so that those white speckles just don't exist anymore. So when you put the colored pencils on top, they look a lot more saturated because those white speckles are no longer tinting that pigment layer on top. So now we've covered that, let's get on to actually how to use the markers. And what I do is I start by coming in with a dark marker, in my case the blue grey 9 here, and I just establish the darkest shadows. I'm then going to come in with a cold grey 4, which is like an intermediary tone, and use it to jot in the shadows that aren't quite as dark as the ones I just did with the blue grey 9. And then I'm going to come in with the cold grey 2 just to blend the edges of these cold grey 4 shadows a bit more into those highlights. And finally, I'm going to come in with the cold grey 2 and just basically go over the entire thing and fill in all the empty empty space and just blend it a smidge more as well. Now I know you're thinking, Tom, this doesn't look very realistic. It's very like streaky, it's not very tidy. But the thing is, again, this is just a base layer and it's the colored pencils a bit later, which is where we're going to add in all the details and really bring it to life. So yeah, this is just ensuring that the pencils that go on top, as I've just said earlier as well, will look as vibrant and saturated as possible because they're going on top of an already colored surface. And something I do on all of my marker bases is I always go slightly lighter than what I actually think the color needs to be, because obviously it's always easier to darken up a lighter color than it is to lighten up a darker color. So if you do make any mistakes, they're less permanent. But if you do happen to go a bit too dark in an area, you can always go in with a lighter colored pencil on top of it a bit later. But obviously it's just a lot better to not have that problem in the first place. Now I realize that a lot of you watching this will have never used markers before, so I just want to show you the first marker base that I ever did on this Porsche drawing, and you can see here just how basic it is. I only used about 4 different colors, but then over time, as I've gradually done more and more, I've increased the complexity of them. I've started to blend the colors a lot more and used more colors as well. So it really is a case of repetition and practice, because be honest with yourself, you're not just gonna sit down and become like a marker maestro, if that's even the correct word, in the first attempt. And the final thing I want to talk about is using the markers to do hair. So on the longer hair, you're going to be using longer marker strokes, and on the shorter hair, you're going to be using shorter marker strokes. But it's really important that the direction that your pen strokes are going in is in keeping with the direction that the hair is going in. So in total, this base layer took around an hour and a half, so it's now time to move on to using the colored pencils. So the pencils that I use for all of my drawings are Faber-Castell Polychromos, so I have a set of 120 here, but again, just like the markers, I'd recommend starting off with like a pack of 36 and then trying them out, and if you like them, then you can get some more colors when you feel that you need more colors. So when it comes to picking the pencils that I'm going to be using, it's pretty much the exact same process as we did with the markers, so just looking at the reference photo going, okay, so I can see these main colors, and then picking out those sub-colors from each of those color families, so the dark colors, the light colors, and the intermediary colors. Now, one thing I do differently with the pencils is I don't actually test them before going into the piece, because obviously if I tested the colored pencils on a white piece of paper, then the color that I'll see on the white piece of paper will not be the same as the color that I'll get on the marker base. And one thing to note as well is that obviously one colored pencil will look slightly different when put onto different tones of the marker base. So if you have, let's say, a light colored pencil and you put it on top of a dark part of the marker base, it will look slightly different to that if you put it on a light part of the marker base. And in order to show you exactly how I'm doing the pencil work here, I'm going to be doing the arm, and the first thing I'm doing is coming in with a relatively dark pencil, so the hello blue reddish here, and just emphasizing the shadows from the marker base. I'm then coming in with a white pencil and crisping up the highlights. And I'm then going in with a middle phthalo blue, so this is an intermediary color, and using it to blend between the darkest shadows and those highlights we just added in. And I can now see that this area right here and also up here is slightly too light, so I'm going back in with the hello blue reddish and just darkening them up. So we now have a pretty good outline of where all these shadows, highlights need to go, and some of the intermediaries as well. But if you look a bit closer, it's still quite blotchy and things. So what I want to do is come in with a light color, so in this case the light phthalo blue, and basically go over the entire thing and really blend it all together using pencil strokes that follow the cylindrical shape of the arm. You can see here that going over those darker colors with that light phthalo blue has obviously lightened those darker colors. So we now need to come back in with that hello blue reddish and darken them up again, because we need to keep the shadows nice and dark in order to keep the contrast nice and high to ensure that the drawing continues to pop. And I then want to come in with the phthalo blue and use it to blend between that hello blue reddish and the lighter colors. And I really hope this proves just the power of using a marker base, because if I did this straight onto white paper, it would have taken me probably twice as long to build up the saturation to make the colors look like that. But because we've got that already colored surface, those pencils look really, really vibrant pretty much immediately. Now, the main problem that people have when using this method is the fact that markers have notoriously bad light fastness. And if you don't know what light fastness is, it's basically the ability of the pigment to resist being faded by natural light. So let's say if you did just go and take the marker base, put it on your wall, over time it would fade. However here, because you're putting pencils on top, it almost shields them, especially with the polychromos, which have an extremely high light fastness. So ever since I've been using this method, I haven't found this as a problem, because again, those pencils shield the marker base and keep everything really nice and vibrant. And as I just showed you when doing the demonstration of the arm, doing the pencil work is a case of using lots and lots of layers. So going in initially with those dark pencils, those really light pencils, and then using some intermediaries just to fill the space in between, and then going in with a really, really light color and blending everything together, then coming back in with those darker colors to bring the contrast back up, and also adding some more details, and then going over it all again with a lighter color, and then one by one you're gradually going to get smoother and smoother results, because the pigment that you're then putting down is mixing with the pigment that is already on the page. And just like with the markers, you can't expect to sit down after watching a few YouTube videos and be like, you know what, my first drawing is going to be absolutely amazing, because it probably won't won't be. You just have to keep going. You do the reps, keep doing the work, taking something from the drawing you just did that you like, taking that one to your next one, taking something you don't like, altering it slightly, then doing that to your next drawing, and then slowly and slowly you'll gradually make these incremental improvements that over time you'll start to be able to create some pretty epic drawings. So there you go, that was my entire process from start to finish of using markers and coloured pencils together in order to create some pretty awesome drawings. If you'd like to see more videos just like this one, be sure to hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one, which should appear somewhat on screen around about now. So yeah, thank you for watching.